Hey everybody, welcome. In this tutorial, we're going to learn about the very basics of Adobe After Effects. Everything from our workspace to how to get started in creating elegant motion design right off the bat. Let's go ahead and get into it. I have Adobe After Effects opened up on my computer right here. As you can see, my workspace is now live. The first thing I do in any workspace is I reset my workspace. So I'm going to go to Workspace under the Window tab. We're going to make sure we're on Standard Workspace. I'm going to then go ahead and hit Reset Standard to Saved Layout. When I do that, that means all of my windows will be in the same place as your windows. Here, all of our different panels are ready to go. You can see we can drag them, we can expand them. So we're going to learn about each of these panels as we go. The project panel is essentially your library. This is where all of your media and assets are going to live. If you use Premiere Pro, it's very similar to your project window that you have in that app. I'm going to go ahead and get started by creating a new folder. We're going to call this folder Images. I'm going to create another folder. These are bins if you use Premiere Pro, same thing though. And we're going to call this one Footage. I'm going to create one more called Composition or Comps. We'll learn a little bit about comps in a few seconds. Now that I have that, I'm going to simply move my mouse into this blank space and double click. And that is going to open up my media panel, in which I can then go into my media and highlight all of my footage and pull it in. I'm going to drag the footage into the footage folder and the image into the images folder. And now I have a nice organized file, which you can see that After Effects is path dependent. If I were to move those images out of the folder, my images would become unlinked. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and drag that picture of the sunset out of my file, and you're going to see really quickly After Effects has some trouble finding it. If you're ever in this situation, simply highlight your asset, right click, and then do Replace Footage File. This will allow you to navigate, in this case, to my desktop and relink that file to the scene. So I always recommend when you're dealing with After Effects to keep everything within the same scene, just to keep it organized, keep everything within the same folder, just to maintain that organization. I'm going to go ahead and drop that back into my file so everything is good to go. The next step is I want to create my composition. The composition will reveal my sequence or my timeline for me at the bottom of the screen. I can do that a couple different ways. I could go to Composition, New Composition, and set up default settings. I could also go here and hit the big New Composition button, or down at the bottom to this film icon that you see here and say Create New Composition. For our sake, I'm going to grab our movie because this is going to be kind of our background, and I'm going to drag it in to that new composition icon. That will create a composition the exact size of my asset. I also get this little composition symbol, which I can now drag into my comps folder. I'm going to double click on that and hit return and call this main scene. There we go. All of my assets are good to go. I have my main scene composition that appears on a tab. I have my movie file within that, and let's get building. Now that I have a timeline active, you can see that my composition is the length of this kind of timeline. I can change the composition length a few different ways. I can go to Composition Settings, or Control or Command K on your keyboards. That will bring this up, where I can change the seconds or the frames. For instance, I wanted to create a 10-second. I could go ahead and type 10, 00 for frames, and go ahead and hit go, and there that is. Let me hit Control Z and undo that, and zoom out a little bit back to where I was. Another fancy way to change your settings is to go to the time frame that you wish. In our case, that's 10 seconds. Anything blue in After Effects you can click on. So I'm going to just click 10 seconds here and snap that holding Shift. And then right click on your work area and trim comp to work area. That's another quick way to kind of trim your file as you see fit. We want a 10-second composition either way. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and out down here just to make sure that I'm truly on 10 seconds. You're going to see it's going to fall a little bit below 10 seconds sometimes. That's okay. But for the most part, we have what we want to do. The next step is to go ahead and drag in our sunset. I'm going to go ahead and drag that in, and you can see here's my image, and it's quite a large image. I'm going to keep it this big, but I have transform controls around the edges. If I wanted to change the color of those transform controls, I could just simply change the label color. This helps me figure out what actual asset I'm highlighting. I'm moving my scroll wheel back and forth here. That's allowing me to zoom in and out, but I could also use my fit, which will fit the composition into the scene. If you have a smaller or slower computer, you may want to change your resolution to either be auto or lower it to about a half or a third. We'll go ahead and lower it to a third. You can see it's a little blurry. That's okay. It will not output this way. This is just for your computer to have enough RAM to work. So now that I have these files, you'll notice the naming convention is pretty similar. Though I can see one is a JPEG and one is a movie, it may be hard down the line to figure out which is which. So a cool thing in After Effects is you can actually name your layers without changing the name of the original file. To do that, it's really easy. You highlight your layer and hit enter, and we're gonna call this layer mountain footage and hit enter again, and click at the top and hit enter once more, and we're gonna call this sunset image. That's going to help us determine what is what. I could then click on layer versus source name. That allows me to see those different layer names versus their source that they're drawn from, which is really helpful. At the bottom of my timeline, I can either expand or collapse my options. So if you don't see all the options I have, it could be based on the computer screen size. So go through and just click on these buttons just to kind of figure out, we can skip that tour, but figure out what you can and cannot fit on your screen. We then have our little track bars in which we can move the assets and how long they appear on the screen, much like Premiere Pro. As you can see, as I drag, this asset for the sunset is no longer present, but if I wanted to make it present, I could just drag that up and we're ready to work. As I have that right now, the next step is to add some text. Let's go ahead and get to our text tool, which is at the toolbar on the top of our screen. By default, you're going to be on the selection tool. You're going to learn to hit the V key quite a few times. The text tool, or Control T, will access that tool. When you click in your timeline, you're going to have an empty text layer. I'm going to type the word journey here in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and put this close to the center and use my different panels, such as my text panel, to go ahead and make this a little larger. So I'm going to just drag anything that's blue. You can drag in After Effects and it's really helpful. We're going to make this quite large and just kind of center that. If you're having trouble centering, go to your align panel. I love this about After Effects. You can actually align it to your composition, which is a really cool tool. So I can quickly align that to the center of my composition. There you have it. So I'm using KC Illhand. You can use any thick font that you wish. The idea here is we're going to eventually mask this sunset to appear inside these letters. I'm not too concerned about the colors right now. I just need 3 layers, a text layer, a image layer, and a footage layer, which you can't see. Let me eyeball that on and off. Another way, if you don't want to continue to eyeball on and off, is to use these solo layers. If I just want to look at one particular layer that's on the bottom of the stack, I can click that solo layer, which is really helpful. We have different things like blending modes. Of course, just like any Adobe program, we could play with the blending modes. As I scrub here, that's kind of cool. Maybe we do kind of a fun overlay here to kind of get the 2 images on top of each other. I'll set that back to normal. That's really nice. But what we're going to do is set our sunset to fill the type journey. To do that, I'm going to use something called a matte effect. Track matte is on your screen here at the top. If you do not see track matte, go to the bottom and make sure that the first 2 little boxes in the bottom left are checked. Once you have that next to the sunset image, you're going to click on that drop down and set that to layer 1 or journey. When you do that, you'll see now that the matte or the image is actually being masked within the journey text. Next to it, we have a few options in which we can play around with. We can invert that so we can see just the journey text at the bottom. That's kind of cool. We may play with that a little bit, but we're going to kind of keep it pretty simple. We're going to make sure the first alpha matte is selected, meaning that it created a mask for us using the text, and we are ready to move. Now, if I wanted to turn that off, it's no big deal. I could just go ahead and click no matte and it will go back to the beginning. Setting it to matte, there it is. If I hit spacebar on my timeline, all of my layers are going to play and it looks really, really nice. The next step is I want to add a little animation to this static image. If I solo this image, just so you can see the image within Journey, that's going to allow me to not be distracted by the background. I'm going to then open the little kind of handle next to the layer sunset image and open the transform layer. I'm going to be greeted with all of my keyframeable properties. Now, keyframes are essentially just telling After Effects when to start or stop any type of movement or change that you apply to that layer. Another quick way to kind of look at it is if you go to the properties panel on any selected layer, you're going to see those same options are there. Quick hotkeys for these: A is going to be your anchor point, P will be your position, T will be your opacity, S will be your scale, and R will be your rotation. If you want to add things, if I wanted to have rotation and position and I already had rotation up, I'd hold Shift and hit Shift P, and that will add that, or Shift S and it will add scale. When you close the little drop down and open it back up, they're all there ready to go. Now that I have those good to go, we're going to do a simple keyframe. I want you to make sure your time slider is set to 0 here on the time bar. We're going to just simply hit this stopwatch next to the word scale. Now that you have that, you've just created your first keyframe, which is kind of registering this point in time. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit here, just to the edge. So I don't want to clip my text too much. I'm just to the edge. That's going to override that keyframe. And we're going to go to about the 5-second mark. And then I'm going to drag my left mouse button onto that scene and scale that image upward. If I were to turn off my matte here, all we did was scale this image upward. Let's turn back that track matte. But the effect it gives us is really cool. If I hit spacebar, it's going to give me a nice kind of movement effect to that image. Now, if I wanted to add a little more cushion or dynamic movement, I can highlight my keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease, or that's also the F9 key. This will just give you a little bit more padding when you initially move your image. The great part about this is you can make this go slower. So let's say that's moving a little fast for us. No big deal. We can just highlight that one keyframe right there. So let's say we want to make this a little faster or slower. We can do that with ease. Now that we have our two keyframes, we can either highlight the keyframe and move it to be a little slower and longer, as you can see, or if we want it really quick, we can move the keyframes closer together and it's going to be rather quick. Let's go ahead and move ours to around the 7-second mark. I can go ahead and just kind of eyeball that. If it's not on exactly, that's okay. Now that I have 7 seconds of movement here, which looks really nice, I can think about the other elements in the scene. Now, we're not going to keyframe anything else, but the one thing I don't want to do is hit the stopwatch again. I want to show you real quick. If I click that again, my keyframes go away. Control Z or Command Z will get them back. So I want to keep that stopwatch clicked as I go. If I want, for instance, this to hold a little bit, I can go ahead and either copy a keyframe with Control C and paste, Control V, and that will hold that. That's one way. Let me undo that. If I want to just put a keyframe right here for a second, I can hit the little keyframe icon, and that will put a keyframe right at the specific spot in which I hit the diamond. It's going to register the number. As you can see, that number is changing as we go using this. This is a good way to, again, if you want to have a kind of a hold or something like that. For our sake, this is looking really good. Let's unsolo that layer and let's look at our final result. Let's hit spacebar. And now we have a really nice final result. Now you saw in the beginning there, we could change this up a bit. If I went ahead and invert my mask, I could see, and we're going to need to play with this, but I could see my character in the middle of the journey, which I actually like a little better. But the problem now is my journey text, or that sunset text, is too small. It's kind of clipping into that background image. Let's go ahead and make sure we snap holding Shift with our time indicator to that keyframe, and let's scale this up a little bit so it's fully covering. Then we can hold Shift and snap to our next keyframe. So I'm holding Shift until my cursor snaps. In this case, we'll just kind of pull that up just a little bit more. Now we have that, and I think we're going to make this even slower. Let's make it the full 10 seconds. Now we have two different images, two different kind of masking types that we have. We have something called a Luma matte. We have an alpha matte. We can go through and change those as we see fit. So again, that invert matte is a really great way to kind of explore the different options depending on what you're wanting to create in your final scene. The last thing I want to do is add a little bit of effect to this sunset in the background. Let's go ahead and let's find our effects and presets panel. In the effects and presets panel, I'm going to go ahead and look for color correction. Here, I have access to most of the color corrections that you're familiar with other Adobe tools. I'm going to pick hue and saturation, and I'm going to drop this on my sunset image. This is going to give me the ability to kind of play with that sunset. Maybe I want to kind of pull down the saturation a little bit, or maybe I want to boost up the saturation or pull down the lightness a little bit. I can even hit colorize and give that a more colorized effect. So I'm going to go ahead and play with the colorized options, and we're going to set this to be just a little bit kind of maybe red. We'll go into red here a little bit, and now we have that nice kind of look to it. Now that I have that red color effect, I could add things like levels, I could add things like curves. All of those are really easy. For instance, if I add a curves here, I get my familiar curves panel. So actually I will do that and just bump up the brightness a little bit. And now we have a really nice look. The final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the word journey. I want it to animate in. I could animate it by going to all my keyframes and setting keyframes. In this case, I'm already in the effects and presets. Let's use a preset. So I'm going to go to animation presets and then Adobe Express and animate in. One of my favorites is the pop in effect. This is a really cool effect wherever your cursor is. If you drag that onto your layer, it's going to add all of these different keyframes. If I hit U, well, that will show me all that keyframing that it did for me. U will show you whatever you keyframed. For instance, if I go to sunset image and hit U, there's those keyframes I made. If I go back to journey and hit U, there they are. And now we have a nice pop in to that final look. If I want to move those, I can highlight all my keyframes and have them start a little earlier. And we're good to go. We've created a really nice final result with a really fun kind of stylistic treatment. The next step is to render this scene. To render, we're going to keep it pretty easy. We're going to go back to our project window and make sure we select the main scene. And then we're going to go to Composition, Add to Render Queue. In the render queue, we're going to get greeted with a few different options. One is where you want to put it. Clicking on the blue text, I'm going to open that up and navigate to my folder. I'm going to call it render. The next is setting what output it will be. If I hit H.264, I'm going to open that up and I can select the different format that I would render. H.264 will give us a .mp4 file, which is a really commonly used file type that will work well for us. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK right there, and then simply hit render. This will take a few seconds to render out, but it will output a nice playable file, which will then appear in my final folder. Now that I have that file and I'm good to go, I'm ready to save After Effects. So to do that, I'm going to do File, and I'm going to go ahead and hit Save. Now I'm going to name this Demo. If I wanted to collect my files, those of you familiar with InDesign may do this. I'm going to go to File Dependencies, Collect Files, and all this will do essentially is we'll collect all those files. If I wanted to create a backup for Google Drive, and I'll go to my desktop and do New Folder, and we'll call this Backup. I could select that folder, hit Save. What happens in the background is it creates a nice folder called Demo Folder right there with all of my files completely named, ready to go. If I needed to pass this off to somebody, it would be ready. There you have it. We've done our intro to After Effects, and we're good to go. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I will catch you next time.